Alright, this morning I'm going to read to you a letter. This is an open letter to the United States. I wrote this yesterday morning. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it to you. What started the modern transgender movement here in the United States? Does anyone even know what the original motivation of transgender people to create change in our societal system was? If you were to look at the behavior of the LGBT and its allies, being a transgender person, and are old enough to remember, I think the answer would be no. The motivation was an extension in the personal treatment of gender dysphoria. Legislation that would make treatment easier to get in the U.S. so legitimate options didn't exist only outside the U.S. Legislation that would make it easier or even possible to change identification to match a person's gender. Legislative protections against discrimination so we could hold a job, rent a house or apartment, receive services, and the things that people take for granted but could legally be denied us. The restroom was an extension of that as well. All we were looking for was legal use in another area that would help alleviate the mismatch, gender dysphoria. To me, it seems the underlying motivation that started this is being ignored. Unfortunately, it was never fully understood. The LGB turned to lawyers to argue the cases. To argue the cases using cisgender definitions and speaking of a transgender need. It doesn't take experiencing gender dysphoria. The one thing above all among transgender people that causes the highest suicide rate among that group. It does, however, require an understanding of it rather than just an acceptance that transgender people exist. The reason we know gender, a person's mind, in its simplest terms, and sex, their physical body, are two separate things in all people is because treatments for a transgender person that works to bring those two things into alignment would bring things out of alignment for a cisgender person. To argue in a court of law that sex and gender are the same things, as they have been historically used from the cisgender viewpoint, is to kick the legs out from under the arguments that treatments are necessary and not simply cosmetic. If gender and sex are the same, then treatments for gender dysphoria are not needed and therefore do not need to be covered by insurance. So thank you for working so hard to try to destroy, unintentionally, the basis of what we seek to change. The LGBT and its allies are pursuing this topic as if it's the same as the topic of sexuality. They're using the same tactics. The only tactics you can use around the topic of sexuality. Acceptance. Accept that it exists, and get over it. The topic of sexuality, however, is a single flag, where the topic of transgender is a three-legged stool, medication, education, legislation, that will only stand if all three legs are made strong. The treatment for sexuality is simply acceptance. The treatment for gender dysphoria crosses over distinctly, uniquely, into both the medical and mental health sectors. Name to me something else that in its treatment does that. You can't, but once again the voice of transgender people are being silenced, as they always have been. And we are being told, shut up, we got this. As you take up the banners through your 501cs, believing your money makes up for your lack of understanding. The Illinois ruling that came down from the federal government under the Obama administration was an incorrect one. Sex and gender are not the same thing, so the 1972 gender equality law that used old cisgender definitions of sex and gender can't in reality be used as a cloth to wipe clean every aspect of the transgender topic. It can be used as the legislation was intended, which was equal participation. Momentum was felt after that ruling, and it seemed everyone in the LGBT and ally community were eager to line up behind it. Everyone but those in the transgender community who know better but are never listened to. Victory has outweighed the need for the original motivation that started all of this. When I speak out in an effort to change your course, I'm accused of my efforts being just about me. that if somehow my speaking out to correct a huge flaw in the course should be taken as a lack of support for the overall goals. The people who started shaking this monkey tree and getting things moving were not only seeing what would be beneficial to themselves, but recognized that if fixed, would be beneficial to those trying to navigate this very difficult path. Even though you are the larger group, I see this becoming about you, and how the difficulties of others can be harnessed to benefit your organizations. I just wish you would stop and bear in mind why this was started and the goals we were trying to achieve.